My mama was locked up, my daddy, my brothers, my cousin, everybody.
There are 2.3 million people locked up in the United States.
I spent more time in prison than I've been in society. That's a shame.
Around half for non-violent crimes.
I shouldn't be in here. I'm in here basically for skipping school.
These inmates are costing states billions they can't afford.
Our number one frequent flyer is not dangerous, but we have probably spent millions of dollars on this guy.
Frontline takes you inside one American neighborhood where getting locked up is a part of everyday life.
The system's set up for them to fail because when they come out of prison, there's nothing for them.
And inside one state that is trying to fix a broken system.
Incarceration has become the response to every social problem that we encounter.
Jail didn't work. Prison doesn't work.
We need to distinguish between who we're mad at and who we're afraid of.
Prison state.
Released today, and it deserves our undivided attention. 1 out of every 100 Americans is now behind bars, locked up in prison or in jail.
Think of prisons, if we bother to think of them at all, that is, there is a tendency to see them as institutions completely divorced from human society.
The first practical use of it was really in the United States, in Philadelphia, try to provide positive change and change someone's behavior, but it was partly as a movement to get away from corporal and capital punishment, to come up with something better. The problem, and the thing that people forgot, was going into a monastery voluntarily and isolating yourself in order to pray and think is very different than being pushed into a cell by the state. One of the things that seems to be true in the history of prison systems is that the philosophies change, but the buildings remain. So you have these massive buildings that are these major expenditures, and very often just used as essentially human warehouses. You would occasionally get people that would try different kinds of experiments in education and therapeutics in some way, in inmate self-government, but usually they were fairly quickly overwhelmed by the crowding in the system, or because they were politically unpopular.
From 1920 until 1970, this whole half century of American history, the rate of incarceration was roughly level at about 110 per 100,000. And this is a broad span of our history. This is, the Roaring 20s and Prohibition, the Depression and all the social change there, World War II, the post-war economic boom, the 50s, the explosion of suburbia, the 60s and all the social turbulence. During this whole period, the rate of incarceration is roughly level in the United States at about 110 per 100,000. And this reflects, the policies of police departments and prosecutors and judges operating all over the country in local and state level. And then in 1970, this all changes. So that by now, the rate of incarceration nationwide is over 700 per 100,000. The rate of incarceration for African Americans is over 4,000 per 100,000. And so you have to wonder, what changed? Why did this half century of stability get upended with this dramatic increase in incarceration in the United States?
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Once the federal government decided that we were going to have a war on drugs, they were able to then take a lot of money from the federal budget and then send it out to states and localities.
I realize the need for money to deal with this problem. I am glad that in this administration we have increased the amount of money for handling the problem of dangerous drugs sevenfold. It will be $600 million this year. More money will be needed in the future.
First, I am recommending legislation making the penalty for all illegal trafficking in hard drugs a life sentence in prison.
The issue before the U.S. Supreme Court today, mandatory life sentences for possession of large quantities of drugs. That is the law in Michigan.
California Governor Pete Wilson signed that state's new 3 strikes and you're out law. It requires a sentence of life in prison without parole for at least 25 years for anyone convicted of
of a third violent felony.
Most of
the direction to a judge to sentence can be done in two ways. You can say, Judge, here's a crime, and for this crime, you can impose a sentence anywhere in this range from probation to some term of years imprisonment. The other way is to say, Judge, you must impose some minimum number of years or months of imprisonment and go up from there. So a mandatory minimum is a sentence where no matter how minor the role of the offender, no matter how insignificant a violation of this crime it is, a minimum term must be imposed.
To my melanated family and spiritually conscious brothers and sisters around the world, I am Brother Tommy, and it is time to get it in one live family. This video is going to discuss mass incarceration in America. It is not only the criminal that they are looking to lock up, it's the average American as well. Please pay attention to what their statutes and codes can do. Thomas Jefferson cautioned us that freedom is not free. The price you must pay for freedom is eternal vigilance. As a people, we have for many years been apathetic to the Congress, the President, and the judiciary, so much so that we never noticed the subtle, diminishing changes that were occurring to our freedom right in plain sight. The American people have not been vigilant, specifically my melanated brothers and sisters. Somewhere along the way, the white supremacist plan for a republic was flipped into something totally different. Without any constitutional authority, the republic was transformed into a democracy. Now the president makes law by executive order, again without constitutional authority. The Congress is powerless because of fierce partisanship and the constant pursuit of money from the international corporations needed to perpetuate their political lives. The result is that they do nothing to check and balance the other runaway branches of the de facto government. The agencies that were created by Congress to make and enforce regulations and administer the draconian laws of the Congress and the executive branch now answer only to the diseased, corrupted body of the executive branch, which answers to no one but the international cartel of bankers, philanthropists, and senior-level policy wonks. These incomprehensible laws of Congress, especially the taxing statutes, are patently unconstitutional in their application to the citizens of the 50 states. But this seizure of the productive people's wealth for the benefit of the non-producing minority and the imprisonment of those who resist this theft have been ratified by a corrupted federal judiciary and Supreme Court. That briefly sums up our present-day democracy and the state of the Union. As a nation, this country has more citizens in prison than any country in the world, over 2 million, and 90% of the crimes of which they are accused are victimless crimes. The law they violated most likely was paid for by corporations to protect them from us. We, however, are the problem because we operate like the tool of the new king, and we do his bidding without questioning whether the law is a good law or a bad one. It is our responsibility as jurors to ask those questions, but we have let the prosecutor and the judge tell us what the law means instead of using the great Creator's gift of intelligence to discern for ourselves. We are responsible for determining not only the facts, but also the law. If that were not true, then we would still have legal slavery and be prosecuting people for helping slaves escape under the Fugitive Slave Act. That law was interpreted and upheld by the courts at the time. We now have replaced morality with abortion on demand, and if we do not kill our children in the womb, we tax them to death the moment they are born. Does it not seem immoral to permit a Congress to spend money that it does not have so that every future generation will be obligated to pay from their labor and property for their entire life on a debt that is 60 or 80 years old? The moment your child is born, she has a debt to the Federal Reserve Bank of $22,000 and then rising. It is not only immoral, it is the thing of which violent revolutions are made. If we do not stop this insanity here and now, our grandchildren will, and it will not be pleasant. Waco, Texas, is the example of what the new king wanted us to see, because that is our future if we do not comply with the king's demands. In 1798, Thomas Jefferson instructed that Congress has not unlimited power to provide for the general welfare, but only those specifically enumerated. Wilson Nicholas, a delegate to the Virginia Convention that ratified the Constitution, said Congress has power to define and punish for counterfeiting and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the laws of nations, but they cannot define or prescribe the punishment for other crimes whatsoever without violating the Constitution. Chief Justice Marshall said, "The police power unquestionably remains and ought to remain with the states." Until this past century, federal courts upheld the view that the federal government could deal only with crimes specifically mentioned in the Constitution. In 1911, the Supreme Court said, "Among the powers of the state not surrendered, which powers therefore remain with the state, is the power to so regulate the relative rights and duties of all within its jurisdiction as to guard the public morals, the public safety, and the public health, as well as to promote the public convenience and the common good." At the founding of this republic, there were only 4 federal crimes. Let me say it again, family, only 4 federal crimes: treason, counterfeiting, piracy, and crimes against the law of nations. Now there are 3,000 federal crimes, 300,000 federal administrative regulations, many of which are punishable as crimes, and about 85,000 local governments with 513,000 elected officials, or 1 in every 500 people. We have an estimated 45 million laws, state, federal, and local. The great creator of the universe gave us only 10 laws with which to live our lives, called the 10 Commandments. It would be impossible, however, to obey 45 million laws. Those millions of laws and the government enforcers are destroying this republic. In 1900, 1 in every $15 went for government use. In the year 2000, it is nearly 1 in every 2. We must contend with 65 times more laws than our grandfathers did at the turn of the 20th century, the most cruel and unjust of those being the tax laws. The old axiom that truth is the first casualty of war is as close to any truth that you will ever find in your investigation of the federal government. When a people is colonized, so is their information. That way they don't from which they come. That being the case, we have been lied to by our government and have been at war with our national government for a very long time, and I believe that is the truth. Since 1933, a concentrated effort has been made to impoverish the people of America. Our wealth has been systematically stripped from us by rapacious taxation and outright theft in the form of usury, interest, and fractional reserve banking policy. Federal agencies publish an average of over 200 pages of new rulings, regulations, and proposals in the Federal Register each business day. The expansion of the federal code is one of the most obvious measures of the increase of administrative control over the citizen. The politicians' effort to socially engineer society by an endless multiplication of penalties, prohibitions, taxes, and prison sentences is a dismal failure. What has been lost in their effort is our freedom. The attack on the individual's rights has reached a point in our lives where a citizen has no right to the use of his own land if the bureaucracy determines it to be a wetland, no right to the money in his pocket or bank account if an IRS agent determines he has taxes owed, and no right to his property if a duck, flying south for the winter, lands in a puddle in his backyard. A man's home is his castle, except when a politician wants the land the house is built on for a low-cost housing project. In America today, a citizen's use of his own property is presumed illegal until proved by multiple zoning and planning commissions. We have to get permission from them to go fishing, just to throw a pole in the water. Since 1985, federal, state, and local governments have seized the property of over 200,000 Americans under asset forfeiture laws, often with no more evidence of wrongdoing than an unsubstantiated assertion made by an anonymous government informant. Government officials now exert vast arbitrary power over citizens' daily lives, from Equal Employment Opportunity Commission bureaucrats that can levy a $145,000 and fine on a St. Louis small businessman because he did not have 45 minorities on his payroll, to the Minnesota and Wisconsin Departments of Natural Resources, which regulate property so that you may not use the lake or swamp contained on your land because an endangered mouse species lives nearby. Federal agricultural bureaucrats can prohibit Arizona farmers from selling 58% of their fresh lemons to other Americans. Customs Service inspectors can destroy import shipments without compensating the owners. Federal bank regulators are officially empowered to seize the assets of any citizen for allegedly violating written or unwritten banking regulations. Federal regulations dictate what price milk must sell for, what size California nectarines can be sold, what crops a person may grow on his own land, what apparel items a woman may sew in her own home, and how old a person must be to buy a beer, even though he is old enough to pick up an AK-47 and die for his country. Government agencies are more out of control than ever before, and the Supreme Court, the supposed bastion and protector of the Bill of Rights, has ratified the power of these federal employees. Government officials have asserted a de facto right to search anybody, anytime, on the pretext of terrorism. Just look at the police killing of black men. The Supreme Court has done nothing. The average American now has no freedom from having government agents strip search his children, rummage through his luggage, ransack his house, sift through his bank records, and trespass in his fields. Today, a citizen's constitutional right to privacy can be nullified by the sniff of a dog on the side of the road or during an illegal search of your home. Thanks for tuning in, family. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until the next video, family, peace.